Piper thought she was just leaving a snarky "Beware of Dogs" sign on her rude neighbor's door to handle a noise complaint. She didn't expect the door to fly open. She didn't expect him to be shirtless, sweating, and looking like a Greek god on the edge of a breakdown. And she definitely didn't expect him to rip that sign down, pin her against the wall with eyes glowing pure gold, and growl the most terrifying warning of her life. "You think I have a dog. You are looking at the wrong animal. You should beware of me." Welcome back to the pack, and a massive hello to all our new listeners joining us here at Linas Romantasy Collection. I am so excited to share this hilarious, steamy, and wild New Year's Eve adventure with you. If you want to see how a snarky architect tries to tame a feral alpha king using nothing but avocado pajamas and a very grumpy cat, you know what to do. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on that notification bell icon right now so you never miss a beat of the romance. And before we get snowed in, I want to know where my pack is howling from tonight. Drop a flag or tell me where you are listening from down in the comment section below. Now, let's find out what happens when the clock strikes 12. Chapter 1. The Penthouse Prison. New Year's Eve was supposed to be a night of glamour, champagne, and midnight kisses. But for Piper Delaney, it was currently involving a half-eaten bag of spicy chips and a very judgmental orange tabby cat named Swish. "Don't look at me like that," Piper told the cat, wiping red dust from her fingers. She was sitting on her plush velvet sofa in her penthouse at Aurora Heights, overlooking the snowy Chicago skyline. "I could be at a party right now. I chose to be here. I am a successful, independent woman who values her peace." Swish narrowed his yellow eyes and let out a low, menacing growl. He was a 20-pound ball of rage who hated everyone. The vet, the mailman, and especially Piper's brother Thomas all had the scars to prove it. The only person Swish tolerated was Piper, and even that was on a probationary basis. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a photo of Thomas making a stupid face. She groaned and picked it up. "If you're calling to gloat about the party, I'm hanging up," Piper answered, not bothering with a hello. "Happy New Year to you too, Grumpy." Thomas's voice came through, loud and cheerful. Background noise of music and laughter filtered through the line. "Mom and Dad just called from Bali. They wanted to know if you're still alive or if you've finally been eaten by that demon cat." "Swish is an angel," Piper lied, watching the cat sharpen his claws on her expensive imported rug. "And tell Patricia I hope she chokes on a canapé." Thomas sighed. "Piper, come on. It's been 2 years since we got married. You used to be best friends. Are you really going to spend another New Year's Eve alone in that glass tower just because you're stubborn?" "I am not alone," Piper defended herself, standing up and walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The snow was falling harder now, thick white flakes swirling against the glass. "I have Swish, I have wine, and I have peace and quiet." Thud. A massive vibration shook the floorboards beneath her bare feet. Piper froze. "What was that?" "What was what?" Thomas asked. "Scratch!" A horrific grinding sound echoed through the wall she shared with the only other penthouse unit. It sounded like someone was taking a garden rake to the drywall. "My neighbor," Piper hissed, staring at the shared wall. "The Frenchman, Bastien Mercier. He moved in a month ago, and I swear he's running a demolition derby in there." "The venture capitalist guy?" Thomas laughed. "I heard he's loaded. Maybe he's throwing a rager. You should go crash it. Maybe you'll finally find a boyfriend." "I don't need a boyfriend, Thomas. I need silence." Another thud rattled the picture frames on her wall. Swish leaped up, his fur standing on end, and hissed at the wall. "Listen, I gotta go," Thomas said. "The countdown starts in 6 hours. Drive safe if you change your mind. The roads are getting bad. Love you, Pipes." Yeah. Love you too, traitor." Piper hung up and glared at the wall. The scratching started again, followed by a low, mournful sound. It wasn't human. It sounded like a whine. A very large, very loud whine. "He has a dog," Piper realized, her eyes narrowing. "That rich jerk bought a dog and left it alone on New Year's Eve." She looked at Swish. "You hear that?" We have a new enemy. Chapter 2. The sign by 8 p.m. The noise had escalated from annoying to alarming. Piper tried to focus on her latest landscape design sketches for a corporate rooftop garden, but it was impossible. Every few minutes, a heavy body slammed against the adjoining wall, followed by that rhythmic, desperate scratching. Scritch, scritch, thud. That is not a poodle, Piper muttered, tossing her stylus down. She paced her living room. That sounds like a Great Dane, or a bear. Who keeps a bear in a penthouse? She imagined the poor creature trapped in the luxury apartment next door. Bastien Mercier was probably out at some high-end gala, drinking expensive scotch and charming models with that deep, raspy French accent of his, while his poor pet went crazy from anxiety. It made her blood boil. Piper hated irresponsible pet owners almost as much as she hated losing clients to her brother's firm. "That's it," she announced. She marched to her hall closet and pulled down her box of pranks. Growing up with Thomas, she had learned that retaliation was an art form. She rummaged past the whoopee cushions and fake spiders until she found it. It was a neon orange plastic sign she had bought for Thomas's office door last year, but never used. "Beware of dog." She grabbed a black marker and scribbled underneath it in angry block letters, "And his rude owner." "Perfect," she smirked. She grabbed a roll of heavy-duty duct tape. She was wearing her home clothes, fuzzy pajama pants with little avocados on them and a tight tank top, but she didn't care. She wasn't going on a date, she was going to war. "Stay here, Swish," she commanded. Naturally, the cat ignored her. As soon as Piper opened her front door to step into the shared hallway, Swish darted out between her legs. "Swish, no!" Piper whispered. Yelled. The hallway was elegant, with marble floors and soft lighting, but right now the atmosphere was heavy. The air felt charged with static, making the hair on Piper's arms stand up. Swish didn't run down the hall. Instead, the cat stopped dead in front of Bastien's double mahogany doors. He arched his back, flattened his ears, and let out a demonic yowl that echoed off the marble. "Shh!" Piper scooped up the angry cat, struggling as he tried to claw at the air. "You're going to get us caught." She clamped the cat under her left arm like a football. With her right hand, she slapped the neon sign onto the center of Bastien's door and aggressively taped the corners. Scritch, scritch. From the other side of the wood, the scratching stopped instantly. Piper froze. She heard a deep intake of breath from behind the door. A sniff. Then a low, rumbling growl vibrated through the wood, so deep she felt it in her chest. It didn't sound like a dog. It sounded like a predator. "Okay, maybe it's a mastiff," Piper whispered, her heart skipping a beat. "Let's go, Swish." She turned to flee back to the safety of her apartment, but before she could take a step, the lock on Bastien's door clicked. Chapter 3. The confrontation. The door didn't just open. It was ripped inward with such force that the wind drafted past Piper's face. Bastien Mercier filled the doorway. Piper's mouth went dry. She had seen him in the elevator before, impeccably dressed in three-piece suits, looking cool and distant. The man standing there now looked like he had been through a war. He was shirtless, his skin glistening with sweat. His dark hair was a mess, falling over his forehead. His chest was heaving, rising and falling in jagged breaths, and his hands were gripping the doorframe so hard the wood groaned. But it was his eyes that terrified her. They were dark, dilated so wide that the irises were barely visible, burning with a strange golden intensity. "What?" he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "Are you doing?" Piper clutched Swish tighter. The cat was going berserk, hissing and spitting at Bastien as if he were the devil himself. Swish could smell something Piper couldn't, the scent of a rival apex predator. Piper tried to summon her courage. She pointed at the sign she had just taped to his chest level. "I'm leaving a review," she said, though her voice shook slightly. "Your dog has been barking and scratching for hours. Some of us are trying to enjoy a quiet New Year's Eve, not listen to a kennel club meeting." Bastien looked down at the neon sign. "Beware of dog." A muscle feathered in his jaw. He reached up and ripped the sign off the wood with a single, violent motion, crumpling the plastic in his fist like it was paper. He stepped out into the hall. He was huge, easily 6'4", towering over her. Piper instinctively took a step back, but her back hit her own doorframe. She was trapped. Bastien moved into her personal space, bracing one hand on the wall beside her head. He smelled like rain, expensive cedarwood, and something wild, like musk and adrenaline. "You think I have a dog?" he whispered, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. His French accent was thick, dripping with a dangerous warning. "Well, you have something in there," Piper shot back, trying to ignore how good he smelled or how terrified she was. "And it sounds aggressive, maybe by a leash." Swish let out a feral scream and swiped his claws at Bastien's bare chest. Bastien didn't even flinch. He just looked at the cat, his lip curling up to reveal teeth that looked sharper than normal. He let out a low, warning growl from the back of his throat, a sound no human should be able to make. Swish immediately stopped struggling, ears flat, trembling in Piper's arms. Bastien turned his gaze back to Piper. The heat coming off his body was like a furnace. "You are playing a dangerous game, ma petite voisine, my little neighbor," he murmured. "You are worried about a dog? You are looking at the wrong animal." He leaned closer, his hot breath brushing her ear. "You should beware of me." Piper's breath hitched. She should be scared. She was scared. But she also felt a sudden, frantic jolt of electricity zip down her spine. "Then stop barking at 3 a.m., she whispered back, her voice breathless but stubborn. Bastien stared at her for a long second, his gaze dropping to her lips, then snapping back to her eyes. He looked like he wanted to devour her. Then a spasm of pain crossed his face. He groaned, squeezing his eyes shut, and shoved himself away from the wall. "Go inside." "Piper," he commanded, his voice strained. "Lock your door. Do not come out. Not until morning." Before she could answer, he retreated into his dark apartment and slammed the heavy door shut. The lock clicked. Then the heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding home. Piper stood alone in the hallway, clutching her terrified cat, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Well," she whispered to Swish, her legs feeling like jelly. "He's definitely not invited to the block party." Chapter 4. The Blizzard Protocol. Piper leaned against the inside of her door, listening to the heavy click-thud of her own deadbolt sliding home. Her heart was beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a stark contrast to the silence of her apartment. "Psychopath," she whispered to the empty room. "He is an absolute, dramatic, French psychopath." She replayed the scene in her head, the sweat slicking his chest, the way his muscles had coiled like steel cables under his skin. And those eyes. For a split second, Piper could have sworn they were glowing gold, like backlit amber. "Contacts," she decided, pushing off the door. "Definitely colored contacts. He's probably one of those method actors preparing for a role as a serial killer." She walked into the living room, needing a distraction. Swish, usually the master of the house, had darted under the sofa and refused to come out. All Piper could see were two glowing yellow eyes peering out from the darkness beneath the velvet cushions. "Oh, don't tell me he scared you," Piper scolded, crouching down. "You fought a Rottweiler last summer. You're fine." Swish let out a low, guttural growl that clearly said, "I am not fine, and you are an idiot." Piper sighed and stood up, walking to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of Chicago was disappearing. An hour ago, the skyline had been a glittering grid of lights. Now it was a wall of white. The snow wasn't falling. It was being driven horizontally by gale-force winds. The glass of her windows rattled in their frames, a terrifying sound 40 stories up. Her phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Severe weather warning. Blizzard conditions imminent. Power grid fluctuations expected. Residents are advised to stay indoors. Travel is prohibited. "Happy New Year to me," Piper muttered, hugging her arms around herself. A chill was seeping into the apartment, subtle but noticeable. From the other side of the wall, the noise started again. It was different this time. No scratching. Just a repetitive, dull thud, 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 like someone pacing, or someone throwing themselves against the furniture. Piper grabbed the remote and turned up the volume on the TV, trying to drown it out with the sounds of the New Year's Rockin' Eve pre-show. Ryan Seacrest was smiling, talking about the ball drop, completely unaware that Piper was trapped in a glass box next to a man who growled like a grizzly bear. "It's just a dog," she told herself firmly, pouring another glass of wine. "A big, poorly trained dog, and a rude owner. Tomorrow, I'm calling the landlord." She took a sip, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut that told her she was wrong. That warning in the hallway hadn't felt like a neighborly dispute. It had felt like a predator giving prey a head start. Chapter 5. Lights Out by 10:00 p.m. The storm had turned into a full-blown snowmageddon. Piper was in the middle of a text battle with Thomas. "Are you scared yet?" "No, I'm thrilled. Leave me alone." When the lights flickered, once, twice. Then, with a heavy electronic groan, the entire penthouse plunged into darkness. "You have got to be kidding me," Piper groaned. The silence was instant and suffocating. The hum of the refrigerator, the whir of the heating vents, the chatter of the TV, all gone. The only light came from the eerie gray glow of the snowstorm swirling outside the windows. A second later, the emergency lights in the hallway kicked on, casting a faint red strip of light under her front door. Piper used her phone flashlight to navigate to the kitchen. "Okay, candles. I have candles." She was rummaging through a drawer when a loud, mechanical clang echoed through the building's ventilation shafts. Then, a robotic voice spoke from the panel on the wall, running on battery backup. "Storm protocol initiated, building security lockdown in effect, all external exits sealed, elevators disabled." "Great," Piper muttered, lighting a vanilla-scented candle. "Trapped in the dark, just what I wanted." She wrapped herself in a thick wool blanket and sat on the sofa. The temperature was dropping fast. Aurora Heights was all glass. Without the heating system, it was basically an ice cube. She was just starting to shiver when she heard it. Crash. It came from Bastien's apartment. It sounded like a table being thrown through a glass partition. Piper jumped, clutching the blanket. Another crash. Then a howl. This wasn't the lonely whine of a dog missing its owner. This was a sound of pure agony. It started low and rose into a jagged, screaming howl that made the hair on Piper's arms stand straight up. It sounded human and animal at the same time. "Oh my God," Piper whispered. Was he hurting the dog? Or was the dog hurting him? She remembered how he looked in the doorway, sweat-drenched, shaking, his eyes dilated. What if he's having a seizure? Piper thought aloud. What if he's sick and the dog is freaking out because he collapsed? She bit her lip. She hated him. He was rude, arrogant, and loud, but she couldn't just sit here and listen to him destroy his apartment or die. Thud. A heavy impact against their shared walls shook a picture frame loose in Piper's living room. It fell to the floor, glass shattering. That was the breaking point. "Damn it," Piper cursed. She stood up, grabbing a heavy brass candlestick holder in one hand and her tactical flashlight in the other. "Swish, you stay here. Guard the fort." Swish, who was still hiding under the sofa, didn't argue. Piper marched to her front door. She unlocked the deadbolt she had promised to keep locked. The hallway was bathed in eerie red emergency light. She walked to Bastien's door. It was silent now. "Bastien?" she called out, banging on the wood with her fist. "Mercier, are you okay?" No answer, just a ragged, wet breathing sound from the other side. "I'm coming in," she yelled, "and if you're naked again, I'm suing." Chapter 6. The Intruder. The door was locked, obviously. Bastien Mercier might be having a meltdown, but he was security conscious. Piper jiggled the handle, frustrated. "Okay, Thomas," she muttered. "Let's see if all those years of breaking into your room to steal your diary paid off." She pulled a bobby pin from her messy bun. It was a flimsy tool compared to a real lockpick set, But the locks in Aurora Heights were electronic smart locks with a physical key override for emergencies. The override cylinders were notoriously easy to pick if you knew the tension point. She shoved the pin in, wiggling it while applying torque with the end of the candlestick holder. "Come on. Come on." Click. Piper grinned. "Gotcha." She pushed the door open. Something brushed against her ankle. She looked down just in time to see an orange blur dart between her legs and into the dark apartment. "Swish!" she hissed. "I told you to stay." But the cat was already gone, disappearing into the shadows of Bastien's foyer. Piper groaned. Now she had to rescue the neighbor and catch her cat. The smell hit her next. It didn't smell like a luxury apartment anymore. It smelled like a forest after a rainstorm, earthy, musk, and pine, mixed with the copper tang of blood. "Bastien," she whispered, clicking her flashlight on. The beam cut through the darkness. The apartment was a disaster zone. Bastien's penthouse was a mirror image of hers, but where hers was filled with plants and velvet furniture, his was minimal and stark. Or it had been. Now it looked like a tornado had touched down in the living room. A heavy oak dining table was overturned, 2 legs snapped off as if they were toothpicks. The expensive leather sofa had been shredded, stuffing exploding everywhere like snow. Deep, gouged claw marks, too wide for any normal dog, marred the pristine drywall. The balcony doors were wide open, letting the blizzard swirl into the room, covering the hardwood floor in a layer of snow. That explained why it was freezing. "Mercier?" Piper stepped inside, her boots crunching on broken glass. She gripped the candlestick tighter, her heart hammering in her throat. She swept the flashlight beam across the room. "Get out!" The voice came from the shadows near the kitchen island. It was barely a voice. It was a guttural rasp, thick with pain. Piper swung the light toward the sound. Bastien was on his knees on the kitchen floor. He was naked, hunched over, his hands gripping the edge of the granite countertop so hard the stone was cracking under his fingers. His back was to her, and Piper gasped. His spine was moving. The skin was rippling, stretching, as if something beneath it was trying to break free. Bones cracked audibly, a sickening wet snap that echoed in the quiet room. "Bastien, you're hurt!" Piper rushed forward, dropping the candlestick. She didn't think. Instinct took over. She thought his back was broken. "No!" Bastien roared, turning his head to look at her. The flashlight beam hit his face and Piper froze mid-step. His face was contorted in agony, sweat pouring down his skin. But it was his jaw. It was unhinged, elongated, and his eyes, they weren't just glowing anymore. They were fully animal. Bright liquid gold with vertical slit pupils. "Run!" he snarled, saliva dripping from fangs that were lengthening before her eyes. "Run! Piper!" Another bone snapped, loud as a gunshot. Bastien screamed, falling forward onto his hands. His fingernails were gone, replaced by long black obsidian claws that scraped sparks against the tile. Piper stood rooted to the spot, her brain unable to process what she was seeing. Not a seizure, a tiny voice in her head whispered. Not a dog. Bastien convulsed, his body expanding, dark fur erupting along his shoulders. He wasn't keeping a wolf in his apartment. He was the wolf. Chapter 7. Flight or freeze. Piper's brain stalled. It was a complete blue screen of death system failure. Logic told her to run. Evolution told her to run. The predator on the kitchen floor, with glowing eyes and claws that were currently gouging tracks into the imported Italian tile, was telling her to run. But her legs wouldn't move. "Did you?" Piper squeaked, her voice an octave higher than normal. She gripped her flashlight like a weapon. "Did you just grow fur?" Bastien didn't answer with words. He answered with a sound that vibrated through the floorboards, a low, rumbling snarl that was half agony, half warning. He threw his head back, his neck muscles straining, as another sickening crack echoed through the room. His shoulder blades shifted, expanding, tearing through the remnants of his skin, like a butterfly breaking a chrysalis, only infinitely more violent and bloody. "Go!" He roared, the word garbled by a mouth that was no longer entirely human. That broke her paralysis. Piper spun around, her boots slipping on the snow-covered floor. She scrambled toward the door, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would bruise her ribs. She grabbed the handle. Slam! A gust of wind from the open balcony hit the room like a physical blow. The pressure change sucked the heavy front door shut right as she reached for it. The electronic lock engaged with a cheerful little beep that sounded mocking in the chaos. "No, no, no!" Piper gasped, fumbling with the latch. It wouldn't turn. The storm protocol had fully engaged. The manual override she had picked from the outside didn't work the same way from the inside without the key, which was currently on her kitchen counter across the hall. She was trapped. She turned around, pressing her back against the door. Bastien had collapsed onto his side. He was convulsing, fighting the transformation. It looked excruciating. He wasn't attacking her. He was trying to crawl away from her, dragging his massive, shifting body toward the far corner of the living room, behind the sofa. "The cold," she whispered. The balcony doors were wide open. The blizzard was pouring into the apartment. The temperature had already dropped to freezing. Bastien was naked, and while he was becoming a wolf, he was currently a shivering, bleeding mess of a man. Piper looked at the door, safety, then at the balcony, danger, then at Bastien, monster. "I am going to die," she muttered to herself. "I am going to die in a penthouse because my neighbor is a werewolf and I have a savior complex." She didn't run out. She ran deeper in. She sprinted across the living room, giving Bastien a wide berth. She reached the balcony doors, fighting the wind that tried to push her back. With a grunt of effort, she grabbed the handles and hauled the heavy glass doors shut, latching them against the storm. The howling wind was instantly silenced, replaced by the sound of Bastien's ragged breathing. "Okay," Piper panted, turning to face the room. She shone her flashlight into the corner. "Okay, the door is jammed, the balcony is closed, and you are—" Bastien looked up from the shadows. His face was halfway between man and beast. His jaw square and heavy, his nose flattened, his eyes pure, glowing gold. "You stupid woman," he rasped. Chapter 8. The monster in the living room. "Stupid!" Piper aimed the beam of light directly into his eyes, causing him to wince and turn away. "I just saved your living room from becoming a snow globe. You're welcome." She was trembling, but the sarcasm was a defense mechanism. If she stopped being snarky, she would start screaming. Bastien pushed himself up into a sitting position against the wall. The transformation seemed to have stalled or paused. The fur on his shoulders receded slightly, and his claws, though still terrifyingly long and black, looked more like hands again. "Why are you here?" he groaned, wiping blood from his lip. "I told you to run." "I can't," Piper said, her voice shaking. "The storm protocol sealed the door. My lockpick trick only works one way. We're stuck." Bastien closed his eyes and let out a defeated growl. "Midnight." "What?" "The shift," he gritted out. "It takes hold at midnight. The new year. The blood moon. It makes the wolf feral. I have—" He checked the heavy Rolex that was miraculously still on his wrist, though the band was straining against his thickened forearm. "I have 90 minutes before I lose my mind." Piper stared at him. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a cold, hard reality. "So let me get this straight," she said, taking a cautious step closer. "You're a werewolf. Like a full moon, silver bullet, A-team werewolf?" "Do not talk about pop culture," he snapped, though he looked like he was about to pass out. "And silver just burns. It doesn't kill." "Good to know," she said hysterically. "I'll keep my jewelry box closed." She looked at him. Really looked at him. He was in agony. The "beware of dog" sign she had put on his door flashed in her mind. The scratching. The growling. He hadn't been neglecting a pet. He had been locking himself up to protect the building from him. "You were trying to chain yourself up," she realized softly. Bastien nodded weakly. "My restraints. In the bedroom. The storm. The power outage. I couldn't get to them in time. The pain hit too fast." He looked up at her, his golden eyes pleading. It was a look of pure vulnerability that didn't match the monster she had just seen. "Piper," he said, using her name for the first time. It sounded strange and intimate in his deep, wrecked voice. "You have to chain me. Before midnight. If you don't, when the clock strikes 12, I will tear this room apart. And if you are in here with me—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Piper swallowed hard. "You want me to tie you up?" "I want you to survive," he said grimly. "Go to the bedroom. Under the bed, there is a steel case. Bring it." Chapter 9. The Chains. Piper moved like a robot. She went into the bedroom, which was surprisingly neat, unlike the disaster zone in the living room, and dropped to her knees. She shone the flashlight under the massive king-sized bed. There it was, a heavy black military-grade case. She dragged it out. It was heavy. "What is he into?" she muttered, trying to keep the mood light in her own head to stave off the panic. 50 Shades of Werewolf? She hauled the case back into the living room. Bastien hadn't moved. He was shivering violently now, his skin pale and clammy. The cold from the earlier open balcony still lingered in the room. "I got it," she announced. "Open it," Bastien commanded, his voice growing weaker. Piper popped the latches. Inside lay heavy industrial-grade steel cuffs attached to thick silver chains. They looked like something used to tow a truck. "Okay," Piper said, lifting them. The metal clinked loudly in the silence. "Where do these go?" "The pillar." Bastien pointed to a thick, structural concrete column in the center of the room. Embedded in the concrete were heavy steel rings that looked like decorative industrial chic design. They were not decorative. "Help me up," Bastien said. Piper hesitated. She had to touch him. She had to touch the werewolf. "Do not be afraid," he whispered. "I have control. For now." She set the flashlight on the floor to cast a wide beam, then stepped forward. She grabbed his arm. His skin was burning hot, radiating a feverish heat that seeped through her clothes. His muscles were hard as rock, trembling with tension. "On 3, she said. 1, 2, 3. She pulled, and he pushed. Bastien groaned, a sound of pure exertion as he got to his feet. He leaned heavily on her, his massive frame dwarfing her. He smelled of sweat and that intoxicating forest scent, pine and rain. It was confusingly pleasant. They stumbled to the pillar. Bastien slumped against the concrete, sliding down until he was sitting at the base. "The cuffs," he instructed, holding out his wrists. His hands were shaking. "Lock them tight. Do not hesitate, and keep the key." Piper knelt beside him. Up close, the gold in his eyes was mesmerizing. She clicked the heavy steel cuff around his left wrist. Click. Then the right. Click. She threaded the chain through the ring on the pillar, snapped the heavy padlock shut, and shoved the small silver key deep into her pajama pocket. He was secured. Bastien slumped back against the pillar, letting out a long exhale. He looked at her, his eyes half-lidded. "You are," he murmured, his voice trailing off. "Crazy?" Piper suggested, sitting back on her heels, her heart still racing. "Insane? A moron for entering the apartment of a monster?" Bastien's lips quirked into a faint, pained smirk. "Brave," he corrected. "You are very brave, ma petite." Then his eyes snapped open wide. His back arched off the pillar, the chains pulling taut. A scream tore from his throat as the second wave of the shift hit him. "Get back!" he roared, thrashing against the chains. "Get away from me, Piper! It's starting!" Piper scrambled backward, grabbing her flashlight, retreating to the safety of the kitchen island, just as the grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime the quarter hour. 45 minutes to midnight. Chapter 10. The Longest Hour. The only light in the room came from Piper's heavy-duty flashlight, which she had set on the kitchen island, pointing upward like a makeshift campfire. It cast long, dancing shadows against the ceiling, turning the wrecked apartment into a cave. Piper sat on the floor, her back pressed against the refrigerator, hugging her knees to her chest. She was watching Bastien. He was fighting a war inside his own skin. Every few minutes, a spasm would rip through him. He would arch against the cold concrete pillar, the steel chains rattling violently. He didn't scream anymore. He seemed determined not to scare her, but low, strained groans escaped his clenched teeth. "You're freezing," Piper said. Her voice sounded too loud in the quiet spaces between his ragged breaths. Bastien was still naked, his skin slick with sweat that was rapidly cooling in the drafty apartment. The temperature had dropped significantly since the power went out. Piper was shivering in her avocado pajamas. He had to be hypothermic. "I am fine," he gritted out, his head hanging low. "Stay back." "You're turning blue, you stubborn idiot," Piper argued. She stood up, her legs feeling like lead. She scanned the room. The shredded remains of his sofa offered nothing. She looked toward the hallway. There was a coat rack near the entrance. She grabbed a long, heavy wool trench coat, cashmere, obviously, and approached him cautiously. "Piper, and no," he warned, his eyes flashing gold. "I am dangerous." "You're chained to a building," she retorted, though her hands were shaking. "And if you freeze to death before midnight, I'm stuck here with a corpse. Lift your arm." She didn't wait for permission. She draped the heavy coat over his shoulders, tucking it around his front as best she could without getting within biting range. Bastien flinched at her touch, a tremor running through his hard muscles, but he didn't snap at her. Instead, he leaned into the warmth of the coat, his forehead resting momentarily against her thigh before he realized the proximity and jerked back. "Why?" he whispered, looking up at her. His human face was fading, his features sharpening, becoming more predatory. "You put a sign on my door mocking me. You think I am rude, you think I am arrogant." "I do," Piper agreed, stepping back to a safe distance. "You are rude and arrogant, and you listen to terrible bass music." She sat down on the floor again, just out of reach of the chains. "But," she added softer, "I also think you're alone. And it's New Year's Eve. And nobody should be alone and in pain on New Year's." Bastien stared at her. The gold in his eyes swirled like molten metal. For a moment, the beast receded, and she saw just the man, lonely, haunted, and shocked by her kindness. "Happy New Year, Piper," he murmured, a ghost of a smile touching his bloodied lips. Then his body seized. A sickening crack echoed from his ribcage, and he threw his head back, a howl tearing from his throat that shattered the fragile moment of peace. Chapter 11. The Countdown. The waiting was the worst part. Piper watched the digital clock on the microwave, which, miraculously, was the only appliance still working on a backup battery. 11:55 p.m., 5 minutes to midnight. Bastien had stopped speaking 10 minutes ago. He was now fully in the throes of the pre-shift, as he had called it. His body was contorting, bones breaking and reforming with terrifying speed. His hands were gone, replaced by massive, fur-covered paws with obsidian claws that scraped sparks against the concrete floor. He was panting, a harsh, wet sound. "Bastien?" Piper whispered. "Run!" he gurgled. It was a single, intelligible word amidst a string of growls. "Bathroom, locked door." "I'm not leaving you," Piper said firmly. She didn't know where the courage came from. Maybe it was the fact that he was fighting so hard to keep the monster contained. Maybe it was because, even in this state, he was trying to protect her. "The wolf," Bastien gasped, "does not know you. It will kill." "The wolf is you," Piper insisted, though she wasn't sure if that was true. "And you aren't a killer. You're just a grump." 11:58 p.m. The wind outside howled in harmony with the creature inside. The blizzard was slamming against the glass, shaking the entire penthouse. Bastien roared, his back arching so violently that Piper thought his spine would snap. The heavy wool coat slid off his shoulders. His skin was gone. Thick, midnight black fur covered his torso. His face was elongating, his nose pushing out into a muzzle. It was horrific and fascinating all at once. It was biology gone wrong, magic gone right. Piper pressed her hands over her mouth to stifle a scream. "Chain Bastien snarled, his voice changing, deepening into a boom that vibrated in her chest. "Check the chain." Piper looked at the steel pillar. The bolt she had secured into the concrete was holding, but the padlock on his wrist cuffs was straining. He was pulling against it with supernatural strength. "It's holding!" she yelled over the noise of the storm. "You're safe! You're secure!" 11:59 p.m. "Arga!" Bastien slammed his fists, paws, into the floor. The tile shattered. He was losing the last of his humanity. Piper checked her phone. The countdown had begun on the screen. 10, 9, 8. "Breathe, Bastien," she shouted, not knowing what else to do. "Just breathe." 7, 6, 5. He looked at her one last time. The human intelligence in his eyes flickered and died, replaced by a raw, ancient hunger. 4, 3, 2. "I'm here," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I'm right here." 1. "Happy New Year." The microwave clock beeped. Bastien threw his head back and surrendered. The sound that came out of him wasn't a scream. It was a roar, a deafening, triumphant, terrifying sound that signaled the end of the man and the arrival of the king. Chapter 12. Midnight. The transformation finished in a blur of motion. 1 second, a man was hunched against the pillar. The next, a beast stood there. Piper stopped breathing. He was massive. Standing on all fours, the wolf's shoulder reached Piper's chest. He was a creature of nightmares and majesty, fur as black as the void, rippling with muscle, thick and coarse. His paws were the size of dinner plates, armed with curved black talons. He shook himself, a violent motion that sent a spray of sweat and blood flying across the room. The sound of the chains rattling was deafening. The wolf lowered his massive head and tugged on the restraint. The steel held. He growled, a sound like a chainsaw idling, and bit at the cuff on his leg. Then he stopped. His ears, pointed and tufted with black fur, swiveled forward. He smelled something. Slowly, deliberately, the massive head turned. Piper was frozen against the refrigerator. She couldn't move. She couldn't blink. She stared into the eyes of the apex predator. They were pure, liquid gold. There was no white in them, no pupil, just endless, burning light. The wolf stared at her. Piper held her breath, waiting for the lunge, waiting for him to test the chains until they snapped so he could tear her apart. Bastien had warned her. "The wolf doesn't know you." The wolf took a step toward her. The chain went taut, snapping him to a halt feet away from her. He whined. It wasn't a growl. It was a high-pitched, confused sound. He cocked his head to the side, looking at her with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. He sniffed the air, his black nose twitching. He smelled fear on her, but he also smelled something else. The wolf lowered his body, his front paws stretching out, his tail giving a tentative, slow wag. "Bastien?" Piper whispered. She took a hesitant step away from the refrigerator. Then another. The wolf didn't lunge. He strained against the chain, not to escape, but to get closer. He stretched his neck as far as it would go until his wet black nose was inches from her knee. He nudged her leg. Piper looked down. The monster wasn't trying to eat her. He was greeting her. Trembling, Piper reached out a hand. Her common sense was screaming at her to stop, but her heart was pulling her forward. She touched the top of his massive, furry head. The fur was coarse, but warm. The wolf closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, letting out a long, heavy sigh that rumbled through his ribs and into her hand. "You're not a killer," Piper whispered, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. She scratched behind his ear, and the wolf's leg thumped against the floor. "You're just a really big, really scary puppy." The wolf opened his eyes and looked at her, and in that golden gaze, Piper didn't see a beast. She saw a soul that recognized hers. For the first time in her life, on a dark, frozen New Year's Eve, Piper Delaney didn't feel alone. Chapter 13. The Alpha and the Orange Menace. The standoff in the living room had shifted from predator versus prey to something far more confusing. Piper sat cross-legged on the floor, the shredded remains of the expensive rug beneath her. The massive black wolf, who she was 90% sure was Bastien and 10% sure was a hallucination caused by stress, was currently resting his heavy chin on her knee. "You're heavy," she whispered, running her fingers through the thick fur behind his ears. The wolf let out a huff of air. His golden eyes half closed. The rage that had consumed him moments before midnight had vanished, replaced by a calm, watchful stillness. It was as if her touch acted as a grounding wire, siphoning off the feral energy. Then, a movement from the hallway caught the wolf's attention. His head snapped up. A low, menacing rumble started deep in his chest. His ears flattened against his skull, and his lips curled back to reveal gleaming white fangs the size of steak knives. Piper froze. "What is it? Is someone here?" She turned to look. It was Swish. The orange menace strutted into the living room with the confidence of a creature who paid the mortgage. Swish paused, staring at the giant apex predator chained to the pillar. "Swish, go back," Piper warned, tightening her grip on the wolf's fur. "He's not in the mood." The wolf snarled, a terrifying wet sound that would have sent a grizzly bear running. He lunged forward against the chain, snapping his jaws at the cat. Swish didn't flinch. Instead, the cat puffed up his tail until it looked like a bottle brush. He walked straight up to the wolf, ignoring the snapping teeth, and stopped inches from the wolf's nose. The wolf paused, confused by the lack of fear. He lowered his head to sniff the orange intruder. Whack! Swish lashed out with a paw, claws fully extended, and slapped the Alpha King of North America right on the nose. The wolf yelped, a high-pitched, surprised sound, and scrambled backward, his claws clicking frantically on the tile as he tried to put distance between himself and the orange demon. He shook his head, sneezing, looking at the cat with genuine bewilderment. Piper burst out laughing. The sound was hysterical, bubbling up from the sheer insanity of the night. "Oh my God," she gasped, wiping tears from her eyes. "Bastien, you big baby, you got beat up by a cat." The wolf looked at Piper, then at Swish, then let out a disgruntled huff. He lay back down, tucking his nose under his paws to protect it, effectively surrendering the territory. Swish, looking smug, marched over to Piper, curled up in her lap, right next to the wolf's flank, and began to purr like a diesel engine. "Okay," Piper whispered, stroking both the wolf and the cat. "We're a pack now, a very weird, dysfunctional pack." Chapter 14. Sleeping with the Enemy. By 2 a.m., the adrenaline had crashed, leaving Piper exhausted and shivering. The apartment was freezing. The wind was still howling outside, battering the glass. And without the central heat, the temperature inside had dropped to near zero. Piper's avocado pajamas were not built for Arctic survival. She had dragged every blanket she could find from Bastien's bedroom into the living room, creating a nest near the pillar. She couldn't leave him. He had told her the wolf didn't know her, but every time she moved more than 5 feet away, the wolf would whine, a desolate, lonely sound that broke her heart. "I'm freezing," Piper chattered, her teeth clicking together. She wrapped a duvet around her shoulders, sitting just out of reach of the wolf's paws. The wolf was watching her. He wasn't cold. His body was radiating heat like a furnace. He kept nudging the blankets toward her with his nose, then looking at her expectantly. "I can't," she told him. "You have claws. If you have a nightmare, I'm toast." The wolf whined again. He stretched his front legs out, exposing his fluffy, warm belly, and gave her a look that was undeniably an invitation. Piper looked at the frost forming on the inside of the windows. Then she looked at the giant living heater. "If you eat me," she warned, crawling forward, "my brother will sue you into the Stone Age." She hesitated, then lay down on the pile of blankets right next to him. The wolf didn't attack. He immediately shifted, curling his massive body around her like a protective donut. He rested his heavy head on her ankles, anchoring her in place. The warmth was instant and heavenly. It soaked through her clothes, thawing her frozen bones. Piper stiffened at first, waiting for the aggression, but all she felt was the slow, rhythmic thump of his giant heart against her back and the deep rumble of his breathing. It was safe. Safer than she had felt in years. "Good night, Fido," she mumbled, sleep pulling her under. The wolf let out a soft, content sigh, licking her cheek once with a rough, hot tongue before resting his chin back down to keep watch over the door. Chapter 15. The morning after. Bastien woke up to pain. Every joint in his body ached. His muscles felt like they had been shredded and knit back together wrong. His head was pounding with the unique migraine that always followed a forced shift. He kept his eyes closed, trying to piece together the night, the storm, the lockdown. Piper. Panic spiked in his chest. Piper. He remembered the sign. He remembered the pain hitting him too early. He remembered her coming in. Chains. He remembered chaining himself, and then darkness. The wolf had taken over. Did I hurt her? The thought made his blood run cold. If the wolf had broken loose, if she had been in the room. Bastien forced his eyes open. The first thing he saw was the destruction. The table was gone. The floor was ruined. The pillar was chipped. The second thing he saw was a head of messy brown hair resting on his chest. Bastien froze. He was lying on his back on the floor, tangled in a duvet. He was human again. And he was stark naked. Piper Delaney was fast asleep, sprawled on top of him. Her face was pressed into the crook of his neck, her arm thrown possessively over his stomach. Her leg was tangled with his. She was alive. She was unhurt, and she was drooling on him. Bastien let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. The relief was so intense it made him dizzy. She was safe. The wolf hadn't hurt her. In fact, based on their position, the wolf had cuddled with her. He tried to shift his arm, which was numb, but the movement woke her. Piper stirred. She groaned, smacking her lips. "Swish, stop moving. You're bony." She blinked one eye open. She wasn't looking at a cat. She was looking at a very human, very masculine chest. Her eyes traveled up to a strong jawline, then up to a pair of amused, golden brown eyes. Piper scrambled backward so fast she tripped over the blanket and landed on her butt. "Oh my God!" she shrieked, covering her eyes. "Put some pants on!" Bastien winced, sitting up slowly and grabbing a corner of the duvet to cover his waist. He ran a hand through his messy hair, offering her a tired, lopsided grin. "Good morning to you too, neighbor." His voice was raspy, deeper than usual. "I see you ignored my advice to run." Piper peeked through her fingers. Seeing that he was decent, mostly, she lowered her hands. Her face was bright red. "You were dying," she defended herself, her voice shaky. "And you were freezing. And you were a wolf." "I was," Bastien agreed softly. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "And you stayed." "I couldn't get the door open," she lied. Bastien chuckled, a low rumble that sounded too much like the wolf's purr. "Liar." He leaned forward, the chains on his wrists clinking. He was still cuffed to the pillar. "Piper," he said, his French accent thick and smooth like velvet, "can you please unlock me? I need to use the bathroom, and I would prefer not to do it on the floor like a dog." Piper stared at him. The terrifying monster was gone. In his place was a devastatingly handsome, half-naked billionaire chained to a pole in her living room. "Right," she squeaked, scrambling for the key in her pocket. "Keys, bathroom. Yes." She crawled over to him, her hands trembling as she reached for the lock on his wrist. "Hey," he whispered, stopping her hand with his own. His skin was warm. "Thank you." Piper looked up into his eyes. The connection she had felt with the wolf was still there. It was stronger. "Don't thank me yet," she whispered back. "Wait until you see what Swish did to your nose." Bastien frowned, touching the tender scratch on his nose. "The cat survives?" "The cat," Piper grinned, turning the key in the lock, "is the new alpha. You just live here now." Chapter 16. Coffee, Eggs, and Werewolves. An hour later. The dynamic in the penthouse had shifted from hostage situation to awkward domestic brunch. Bastien had managed to shower, in Piper's shower, using her lavender body wash because his plumbing was wrecked, and had pulled on a pair of sweatpants he salvaged from his bedroom. He was currently in Piper's kitchen, cooking eggs with the focus of a man defusing a bomb. Piper sat at the island, clutching a mug of coffee like a lifeline, watching him. "So," she started, watching the muscles in his back shift as he whisked. "Let me recap. You aren't just a werewolf. You're the king of werewolves." Bastien turned, leaning his hip against the counter. He looked shockingly domestic, despite the fact that he could rip a car door off its hinges. "The technical title is Alpha of the North American Coalition," he corrected, his French accent thick. "But yes, king is shorter," Piper snorted. "And you live in Chicago because it is neutral territory, and because I like the architecture." He gestured to the window with a spatula. "I am a venture capitalist, Piper. That is real. The pack business is hereditary. The business empire is my hobby." He plated the eggs and slid them in front of her. He didn't serve himself, he just watched her, his golden eyes tracking her every movement. "Aren't you eating?" she asked, picking up her fork. "I will eat later. Wolves eat after their mates are fed." He hesitated on the word mates, substituting it quickly, but Piper caught it. "You almost said it," she accused, pointing her fork at him. "Last night, before the howling started, you said the wolf wouldn't hurt me because of the bond." Bastien sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "I did not want to burden you with this, not yet. You are human. Your world is logical, mine is instinct." He walked around the island, stopping right in front of her. He braced his hands on the marble, trapping her in her stool. "When a wolf finds his mate," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble, "it is not like human dating. There is no swiping left. It is absolute. My wolf recognized you the moment we met in the elevator 3 weeks ago." Piper frowned. "But last night, you said the wolf didn't know me. You said he would kill me." "I was afraid," Bastien admitted, his voice rough. "The blood moon makes the wolf feral. It clouds the mind. I thought the madness would override the recognition. I was wrong. He knew you. He will always know you." Piper blinked, processing that. "So the time I spilled my latte on your shoes 3 weeks ago, he knew?" "Oui," Bastien smirked. "My wolf wanted to fall to his knees and worship you. I, however, wanted to pay for dry cleaning. It was a conflict." Piper laughed, but the sound died in her throat as he reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric. "So," she whispered, "I'm your meant to be?" "You are my everything," he corrected gravely. "But I know you, Piper Delaney. You value your independence. You do not want a husband, let alone a king who comes with claws and a pack of political enemies. That is why I stayed away. That is why I tried to chain myself." He pulled back, a look of regret in his eyes. "I did not want to trap you in my world." Chapter 17. The Pull. The storm outside had finally broken. The sun was trying to peek through the gray clouds, casting a pale winter light over the city. By all logic, Piper should have unlocked the front door and told him to leave. She should have called Thomas, gone to her parents' house, or fled the state. But she couldn't. It wasn't just the snow blocking the roads. It was a physical pull in her chest. Every time Bastien moved to the other side of the room to clean up the mess, she felt a tug, like a magnet seeking true north. They were in the living room. Swish was asleep on the velvet armrest of the sofa, looking smug. "You smell different," Piper noted. She was standing by the window, but she could smell him from across the room. Cedar, rain, and that unique spicy warmth. It was intoxicating. Bastien froze. He was folding the heavy duvet they had dragged in from the bedroom. "That is the bond. It is waking up in you. Now that you know what I am, your senses are adjusting." He stood up and looked at her. The distance between them felt unbearable. "Piper," he warned, seeing the look in her eyes. "Do not look at me like that." "Like what?" she asked, taking a step toward him. "Like you want to play with fire." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I am holding back by a thread. The wolf is very close to the surface. He wants to claim what is his. If you come closer, I cannot promise I will be a gentleman." Piper stopped. She thought about her life, the lonely nights talking to her cat, the constant bickering with Thomas because she had no one else to focus on, the endless work to prove she didn't need anyone. She didn't need anyone. But looking at Bastien, this powerful, terrifying, gentle man who had chained himself to concrete to keep her safe, she realized she wanted him. She took another step. "I never liked gentlemen," she said softly. "They're boring." Bastien's eyes darkened, the gold flaring bright. "Be sure, Piper. If I cross this room, there is no going back. You become mine, in every way." "I put a sign on your door," she reminded him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. "I told the world to beware. Maybe I like the danger." She took the final step, closing the gap. She reached out and laid her hand flat against his chest, right over his heart. It was beating furiously, matching hers. "I'm not scared of the dog, Bastien," she whispered, looking up at him. "And I'm not scared of the king." Bastien let out a groan that sounded like a growl. "Then God help us both." Chapter 18. Surrender. He didn't kiss her gently. He kissed her like a man starving. Bastien's arm swept around her waist, lifting her off the floor and crushing her against his chest. His mouth captured hers, hot and demanding, tasting of coffee and desperate need. Piper gasped, wrapping her legs around his waist as he carried her out of the living room. She tangled her fingers in his hair, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss. He didn't take her to the bedroom. They didn't make it that far. He pressed her against the wall in the hallway, his hands roaming over her curves, possessing her. "Mine," he growled against her lips, nipping at her bottom lip. "Say it." "Yours," Piper breathed, her head spinning. "I'm yours." The world narrowed down to sensation, the rough slide of his hands against her skin, the heat of his body, the scent of him filling her lungs. He carried her to the kitchen island, setting her down on the cool marble. He moved between her legs, his golden eyes burning with a mixture of adoration and raw primal hunger. "I have wanted this since the moment I saw you," he confessed, his voice ragged. He kissed the sensitive spot behind her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "I watched you fight with the doorman. I watched you yell at your brother on the phone. I loved every sharp, witty, beautiful piece of you." "You stalker?" Piper panted, unbuttoning his shirt with shaking hands. "Guardian," he corrected, biting gently at the column of her throat. "I was waiting for you to be ready." "I'm ready," she demanded, pulling him down to her. The romance that followed was intoxicating. It wasn't just physical. It was an emotional collision. For Piper, it was the surrender of her loneliness, the breaking down of the walls she had built for years. For Bastien, it was the final anchoring of his wild nature. He worshipped her body with a reverence that made her want to cry, and he took her with a passion that made her forget her own name. When he finally claimed her, biting gently on the mark at the junction of her neck and shoulder to seal the bond, Piper didn't feel pain. She felt a rush of warmth, a golden thread snapping into place, connecting her soul to his. Later, as they lay tangled together on the oversized sofa in the living room, which had survived the night mostly intact, wrapped in a blanket, the silence was comfortable. Bastien kissed the top of her head, his arm heavy and protective over her waist. "So," Piper murmured sleepily, tracing the muscles of his chest. "Does this mean I get free rent?" Bastien chuckled, the vibration rumbling against her back. "You own the building now, Moraine. You can charge yourself whatever you like." Piper smiled, closing her eyes. "Good, because Swish is going to need a bigger litter box." As if summoned, Swish jumped up onto the sofa, walked over Bastien's legs, and curled up directly on Piper's stomach, glaring at the Alpha King daring him to object. Bastien just sighed and pulled the blanket over all three of them. "Happy New Year, Piper," he whispered. "Happy New Year, Wolf Boy." Chapter 19. Reality check. The spell of the blizzard broke at noon on New Year's Day. It started with a beep, then a whir, then the blinding glare of the recessed LED lights turning back on at 100% brightness. Piper groaned, throwing her arm over her eyes. "Turn off the sun." "It is the automation system." Bastien's voice came from somewhere above her. "Power is restored to the grid." Piper sat up, blinking. The romantic candlelit cave atmosphere was gone. In the harsh light of day, her apartment looked like a campsite. Blankets were strewn everywhere, empty mugs littered the coffee table, and the expensive throw pillow Swish had attacked earlier was shedding feathers all over her velvet rug. "Oh, wow," Piper whispered, looking around. "We really trashed the place." Bastien walked in from the kitchen. He had found a black t-shirt, one of his own that had survived the shredding next door, to go with his gray sweatpants. He looked frustratingly composed, while Piper felt like a bird's nest. "Material things," Bastien dismissed, handing her a glass of orange juice. "I have already called my contractor. He is next door fixing my structural adjustments." "Structural adjustments?" Piper laughed, taking the juice. "You chewed through a table leg, Bastien." "I was teething," he deadpanned, his golden eyes sparkling with amusement. He sat down on the edge of the sofa next to her. The air shifted immediately, becoming heavier, charged with that magnetic pull. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing over her bottom lip. "Are you regretting it?" he asked quietly. "Now that the lights are on? Now that you see the mess?" Piper leaned into his touch. "The mess is fine. I'm just wondering how I'm going to explain to my insurance company that a large dog ate my drywall. Tell them it was a very large, very wealthy dog who will pay for everything," Bastien murmured, leaning in to kiss her. It was a slow, lazy kiss, tasting of oranges and promise. For a second, Piper forgot about the damage. She forgot about the world outside. Then her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Then it chimed. Then it started ringing. Piper pulled back, groaning. She picked up the phone. 15. Missed calls, Thomas. 3. Missed calls, the traitor, Patricia. "Oh no," Piper whispered. "Who is it?" Bastien asked, his voice hardening instantly. The Alpha didn't like interruptions. "My brother," Piper said, her eyes widening as she read the latest text. "And his wife. They saw on the news that power was restored in the loop. They were worried because I stopped texting 12 hours ago." She looked up at Bastien in horror. "They're downstairs. They used the emergency key code. They're coming up." Chapter 20. Panic cleaning. "You have to hide," Piper said, jumping off the sofa and scrambling to gather the blankets. Bastien didn't move. He sat there, looking like a king on a throne, unbothered by the chaos. "I do not hide," he stated calmly. "This is my territory. You are my mate. Why would I hide?" "Because Thomas is annoying," Piper stressed, throwing a throw pillow over a particularly deep claw mark in the floor. "He's my big brother. He judges everything. If he sees you here, half-naked, amidst a destroyed apartment, he's going to ask questions. Questions like, 'Why does your boyfriend have claws?' And, 'Did you have a wrestling match with a bear?'" Bastien stood up, crossing his arms. His biceps bulged against the black t-shirt. "I can handle your brother, Piper." "No. You can't. You'll growl at him. You're still edgy from the moon," Piper argued, rushing to the mirror to fix her hair, which looked like she had been electrocuted. "Just go to your apartment, please?" Bastien raised an eyebrow. "My apartment is currently filled with contractors fixing the damage. I cannot hide there." Piper paused. "Right. And," Bastien added, stepping closer and wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, trapping her. "I smell his scent in the elevator. He is already here." Ding. The elevator doors, which opened directly into the penthouse foyer, slid open with a cheerful chime. "Piper!" Thomas's voice boomed through the hallway. "We come bearing leftovers and rescue supplies. Are you alive?" "And coffee," Patricia added. Piper froze in Bastien's arms. She looked down at herself, avocado pajamas, no bra, wild hair, then at Bastien, intense, predatory, and clearly possessive, then at the room, shredded furniture. "Swish, attack," Piper whispered desperately to the cat. Swish, who was cleaning his paw on the mantel, yawned. Thomas walked around the corner into the living room, carrying a paper bag. Patricia followed, looking chic in her winter coat. "Jesus, Piper, why didn't you answer your—" Thomas stopped dead. He dropped the paper bag. He stared at the explosion of blankets, then at the pile of feathers on the rug, then at the 6'4" wall of muscle standing directly behind his sister, glaring at him with eyes that were a little too gold to be natural. "Holy," Thomas trailed off. "Did you guys get robbed? Or did you have the wildest New Year's party in history?" Chapter 21. Meet the Alpha. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush a diamond. Bastien didn't step away from Piper. If anything, he moved closer, his chest pressing against her back, his chin lifting in a challenge. He was radiating alpha waves so strong the air felt thick. "Thomas!" Piper squeaked, stepping out of Bastien's hold to diffuse the tension. "Patricia, hi, Happy New Year. Happy New Year," Patricia whispered, her eyes wide as she looked at Bastien. She nudged her husband. "Thomas, stop staring." Thomas blinked, recovering his composure. He was a successful lawyer, used to intimidation, but Bastien Mercier was a different breed of intimidating. "I'm Thomas," he said, stepping forward and holding out a hand, his protective big brother mode kicking in. "Piper's brother. And you are?" Bastien looked at the hand, then at Thomas's face. He paused for a beat, just long enough to make Thomas sweat, before gripping his hand. "Bastien Mercier," he said. His voice was a low rumble, the French accent wrapping around the words like smoke. "I am Piper's neighbor." "Neighbor?" Thomas raised an eyebrow, looking at how comfortable Bastien looked in Piper's space. "You guys seem pretty close for neighbors." "We are very neighborly," Bastien said dryly. He didn't let go of Thomas's hand immediately. It was a subtle power play. "You have a key to this apartment?" "Yeah," Thomas frowned, pulling his hand back. "Family emergency key. Who are you to ask?" "The man who ensures no one enters this penthouse unannounced," Bastien replied smoothly. "Even family." Piper stepped between them. "Okay. Testosterone levels are too high. Bastien is my boyfriend. It's new. Very new. Like last night new." Patricia gasped, a smile breaking out. "I knew it. I told Thomas you were seeing someone. That's why you didn't come to the party." "Yes," Piper lied through her teeth. "We were having a private celebration." "Clearly," Thomas muttered, looking at the decimated feather pillow. "Looks like things got wild. Did you guys use a chainsaw?" "It was a prank," Piper said quickly. "A prank gone wrong. We were pillow fighting." "You fought with a wood chipper?" Thomas asked skeptically. Just then, Swish decided to make his presence known. The orange tabby jumped down from the mantel and trotted over to the group. Usually, Swish would hiss at Thomas. Thomas instinctively stepped back, shielding his ankles. "Watch out," Thomas warned Bastien. "That cat is a demon. He hates men." Swish ignored Thomas completely. He walked straight up to Bastien and rubbed his orange head affectionately against Bastien's shin, purring loudly. Thomas's jaw dropped. "No way. That cat has tried to murder me for 3 years. Why does he like him?" Bastien looked down at the cat, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He looked back at Thomas. "Animals have excellent instincts," Bastien said. "They know who the alpha is." Piper choked on her own spit. "Right," Piper clapped her hands. "Coffee." Patricia brought coffee. "Let's all drink coffee and stop analyzing the cat's loyalty." She grabbed Bastien's hand, lacing her fingers with his. She expected him to pull away or be stiff. Instead, he squeezed her hand tight, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles. He leaned down, whispering in her ear, loud enough for Thomas to hear. "I will pour the coffee they brought, chérie. You sit. You have had a strenuous night." Piper turned bright red. Thomas looked like he wanted to punch something. Patricia looked like she wanted popcorn. It was going to be a long year. Chapter 22. The Third Degree. "So, Bastien," Thomas said, leaning back in Piper's kitchen chair as if he were conducting a deposition rather than eating a bagel. "Venture capital. That's vague. What exactly do you invest in?" The atmosphere in the penthouse was still thick enough to cut with a knife. Piper was nervously shredding a napkin. Patricia was watching the interaction with the eagerness of someone watching reality TV. Bastien stood by the counter, sipping black coffee. He hadn't sat down. He loomed. It was a power move. And it was working. "I invest in potential," Bastien replied smoothly, his golden eyes unblinking. "I acquire distressed assets, stabilize them, and ensure they reach their full power. I am very good at protecting my investments." He looked directly at Piper when he said investments. Piper kicked him under the table. Bastien didn't even flinch. "Distressed assets," Thomas repeated, eyeing Piper's messy hair and pajama set. "Is that what we're calling my sister now?" "Hey!" Piper protested. "I think Piper is an asset of high value," Bastien said, his voice dropping an octave. "She simply required better management." Thomas narrowed his eyes. "Careful, Frenchie. Piper is independent. She doesn't like management. She usually bites the hand that tries to feed her." "I have noticed," Bastien smirked, touching the scratch on his nose that Swish had inflicted. "She has spirit. I prefer a challenge. Easy things bore me." Patricia chimed in, leaning toward Piper. "He is intense, Pipes. Like romance novel cover model intense. Where did you find him? The hallway?" "Technically, she found me," Bastien answered for her. "She left a note on my door. It was very romantic." Piper choked on her coffee. "It was a noise complaint. It was a beware of dog sign." "Wait," Thomas laughed, pointing a bagel at her. "You did the beware of dog prank on him? The one you did to my college roommate?" "She has a history of this?" Bastien asked, raising an eyebrow. "Oh yeah," Thomas grinned, the tension finally breaking. Piper uses humor as a shield. If she pranks you, it means she likes you, or she wants to kill you. It's a fine line. Bastien looked at Piper. The amusement in his eyes softened into something warmer, something that made Piper's toes curl. "I will keep that in mind," Bastien murmured. "I look forward to seeing what other pranks she has." "Okay, enough." Piper stood up, her face burning. "Show's over. Don't you guys have a hangover to nurse? Go home." Thomas stood up, checking his watch. "Yeah, we should go. But seriously, Bastien, hurt her, and I won't care how much money you have. I'll come for you." Bastien's expression turned solemn. He offered his hand to Thomas again. "If I ever hurt her," Bastien vowed, his voice ringing with a terrifying sincerity, "you will not have to come for me. I will destroy myself first." Thomas paused, looking taken aback by the gravity of the statement. He shook Bastien's hand, looking a little unsettled. "Right. Okay. Intense. Good. See you, Pipes." As the elevator doors closed on her family, Piper slumped against the counter. "That," she groaned, "was mortifying." "I liked him," Bastien said, finishing his coffee. "He is protective. Good pack instincts. For a human." Chapter 23. The Doubt. By evening, the silence had returned to the penthouse, but it wasn't the comfortable silence of the night before. It was heavy. Bastien had gone across the hall to his own wrecked apartment to salvage some clothes and check in with his team, which Piper assumed meant barking orders at other werewolves. Left alone, Piper started to spiral. She walked around her living room, picking up the last of the feathers from the rug. She looked at the city lights below. Reality was crashing in. Bastien wasn't just a guy. He was a king. He spoke about territory and pack. He had vowed to destroy himself if he hurt her. It was all so big, so epic. And she was Piper. She designed rooftop gardens. She talked to her cat. She wore avocado pajamas. I'm out of my league, Swish, she whispered to the cat, who was busy kneading a blanket. He's an alpha. He needs a Luna, someone fierce and regal, someone who doesn't get motion sickness in elevators. When Bastien returned an hour later, he found her sitting on the floor, staring at the wall. Piper? He sensed her mood immediately. He didn't walk in with his usual swagger. He moved quietly, kneeling beside her. What is wrong? You smell sad, salt water and anxiety. Piper pulled her knees to her chest. My family is gone, the adrenaline is gone, and now I'm thinking. Dangerous activity, he joked gently, reaching for her hand. She pulled her hand away. Bastien froze. His eyes flashed gold, hurt flickering in the depths. Bastien, this is crazy, Piper said, her voice trembling. Yesterday, I didn't know magic existed. Today, I'm apparently mated to a werewolf king. You're intense and you're rich and you're a lot. I'm just me. I feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to realize you made a mistake. The bond makes no mistakes, he growled softly. But maybe you do, Piper argued, standing up. You're infatuated because of the moon. Once that wears off, you're going to see that I'm difficult and messy, and I have trust issues, and I don't know how to be a queen. Bastien stood up slowly. He didn't yell. He looked at her with a patience that was maddening. You think this is about the moon? He asked quietly. You think I want a queen who sits on a throne and looks pretty? Piper, I have a pack full of wolves who follow orders. I do not need a follower. I need a partner. I need someone brave enough to put a sign on my door and tell me to shut up. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice cracking. I'm scared you're going to overwhelm me. I'm scared I'll lose myself. Bastien nodded. He stepped back, giving her space. I understand. I came on too strong. The wolf, he is impatient. He looked at the door. I will give you space, Piper. I will go to my estate for the night. I will let you breathe. He turned and walked to the door. He didn't look back, but his shoulders were hunched as if he were carrying the weight of the world. When the door clicked shut, Piper felt the air leave the room. She got what she wanted, space. So why did it feel like she couldn't breathe? Chapter 24. The Retaliation. The next morning, Piper woke up miserable. She had barely slept. The apartment felt too big and too quiet without the looming presence of the alpha next door. Even Swish was moping, pacing by the front door and meowing at the hallway. I know, Piper grumbled, pouring coffee. I messed up. I got scared. I pushed him away. She decided she needed to work. Routine. Routine was good. She had a site visit at a new office building downtown. She showered, dressed in her power suit, which helped her feel 10% less like a crying mess, and headed down to the garage. She walked toward her beloved yellow Jeep Wrangler. She stopped. Her jaw dropped. No way, she whispered. Her Jeep was there, and the lock had clearly been popped, but there was no damage. It wasn't alone. Sitting in the driver's seat of her Jeep was a giant, stuffed wolf plushie. It was massive, the size of a human, wearing a custom-fitted tuxedo. And taped to the windshield of her Jeep was a neon orange sign. It was identical to the one she had put on his door, but the text had been changed. In bold black Sharpie, it read, "Beware of human. She bites, but I like it." Piper stared at it. A laugh bubbled up in her chest. It started as a giggle and turned into a full-blown cackle that echoed in the concrete garage. He hadn't given up. He hadn't gotten angry at her rejection. He had listened to Thomas. Piper uses humor as a shield. He was speaking her language. She walked up to the Jeep and pulled the note off the windshield. On the back, in elegant, scrawling handwriting, was a message. Space is boring. I prefer the war. Dinner tonight? I promise not to growl at the waiter. The dog. Piper pressed the note to her chest, grinning like an idiot. The fear that had been strangling her all night evaporated. He wasn't trying to change her into a regal queen. He was pranking her back. Okay, wolf boy. she whispered, unlocking the door and shoving the giant tuxedo-wearing plushie into the passenger seat. "You want a war? You got one?" She pulled out her phone and texted him. "Piper, the plushie is nice, but the tuxedo is tacky. Pick me up at 7 and bring kibble." Bastien, reply immediately. Woof. Piper laughed, revving the engine. She wasn't losing herself. She was just finding someone weird enough to run with her. Chapter 25. The Architect of His Heart. Bastien did not bring kibble. He brought a single, perfect white orchid and a reservation at the Summit, Chicago's most exclusive rooftop restaurant. But as the elevator whisked them up to the 60th floor, Piper felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She looked down at her dress, a sleek emerald green silk number that Thomas's wife Patricia had emergency couriered to her. "I feel like an imposter," Piper admitted, smoothing the fabric. "I usually come to places like this wearing steel-toed boots and a hard hat." Bastien, looking devastating in a charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders like a second skin, reached over and took her hand. His thumb rubbed over her knuckles, a grounding touch. "You are not an imposter, Piper," he said, his voice low. "You are the reason this place exists." The elevator doors opened. The restaurant was breathtaking. Glass walls offered a panoramic view of the frozen city. But the interior was a lush, verdant jungle with massive weeping figs, walls of living moss, and delicate orchids created private alcoves for the diners. "I designed this," Piper whispered, stepping out. She looked around, critical eyes scanning the foliage. 2 years ago, the irrigation system was a nightmare." "I know," Bastien murmured near her ear. "I read the Architectural Digest feature on it. The woman who brought the Amazon to Chicago." Piper turned to look at him, surprised. "You read that?" "I told you," Bastien smirked, guiding her to the best table in the house, nestled under a canopy of wisteria. "I have been watching you for a long time. I did not just see a beautiful woman in the elevator. I saw a brilliant artist who yells at her plants when they do not grow straight." Piper laughed, the sound startled out of her. "I do not yell at them. I motivate them aggressively." The dinner was perfect. Bastien was charming, attentive, and surprisingly funny. He didn't order for her or try to dominate the conversation. He asked about her work, her rivalry with Thomas, and why she preferred cats to dogs, a sore subject he found hilarious. But the best moment came when the waiter arrived with the bill. A man at the next table, a wealthy, loud tech bro, leaned over. "Hey, honey," the man called to Piper, ignoring Bastien. "You look familiar. Didn't you used to work the coat check here?" Piper stiffened. It was the kind of casual sexism she dealt with constantly in her industry. Before she could answer, a vibration of pure warning resonated through the table. It was deep enough to make the silverware rattle against the china. Bastien slowly turned his head. His eyes were flashing a dangerous, molten gold. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't stand up. He just projected an aura of such terrifying, primal violence that the air in the restaurant seemed to drop 10 degrees. "She," Bastien said, his French accent thick and dripping with venom, "is the architect who built the floor you are sitting on. If you speak to her with disrespect again, I will ensure you are removed from it, vertically." The man turned pale, mumbled an apology, and practically ran to the exit. Piper looked at Bastien. Her heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a fierce, soaring pride. "Vertically," she teased, reaching across the table to grab his hand. Bastien's eyes cleared, the gold fading back to warm brown. He kissed her knuckles. "I promised not to eat the waiter," he said innocently. "I said nothing about the patrons." Chapter 26. The New Sign. The drive back to Aurora Heights was quiet, but it was a comfortable, warm silence. Piper rested her hand on Bastien's thigh, and he drove with one hand on the wheel, the other holding hers tight. When they stepped out of the elevator onto the penthouse floor, Piper headed toward her door. "Wait," Bastien said, pulling her gently toward his apartment. "Bastien," she warned, smiling, If you have another wolf plushie, I'm going to charge you storage fees." "No plushies," he promised, "but I made a modification to the hallway. I wanted your approval." He led her to his double mahogany doors, the ones that still bore the faint scratches from his transformation night. Piper gasped. The center of the door, where she had taped her neon plastic sign, was no longer empty. In its place, screwed into the expensive wood, was a custom-made brass plaque. It was elegant, polished, and clearly very expensive. Engraved in bold black letters were the words, "Beware of the Queen. The King bites too." Piper stared at it. Her throat felt tight. "You're ridiculous," she whispered, tracing the letters with her finger. "This is tacky. It ruins the aesthetic of the hallway." "I think it is a necessary warning," Bastien murmured, stepping up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his chin on the top of her head. "Because you are the only one who can handle me, Piper. You are the only one who runs toward the monster when the lights go out." He turned her around in his arms, his expression solemn. "I do not want to change you," he vowed. "I do not want a silent Luna. I want the woman who puts neon signs on my door and argues with me about paint colors. I want the partner." Piper looked up into his eyes. The fear she had felt yesterday, the fear of losing herself, was gone. Bastien didn't want to shrink her to fit his world. He wanted to expand his world to fit her. "Okay," she whispered, grabbing the lapels of his suit. "But we are getting a plaque for my door, too." "Oh?" Bastien raised an eyebrow. "What will it say?" Piper grinned, pulling him down for a kiss. "Beware of the cat. He slaps alphas." Bastien laughed, a rich, happy sound that echoed in the hallway. He swept her up into his arms, bridal style. "Deal," he said. He kicked the door open, not ripping it off the hinges this time, and carried her into the darkness of his apartment, which no longer felt like a cage, but like a home. Chapter 27. Epilogue. 1 year later, December 31st, 1 year later. "Swish, stop eating the tinsel. That is a choking hazard." Piper chased the fat, orange tabby cat across the living room of the penthouse. Swish, looking particularly round and smug, drifted around the corner with a string of silver garland trailing from his mouth. "He does not listen," Bastien observed from the kitchen. Piper stopped, putting her hands on her hips. "He listens to you. You're the alpha. Do something." Bastien walked into the living room. He was wearing a tuxedo, his tie undone, looking effortlessly regal. He held a tray of champagne flutes. "I am the alpha of wolves," Bastien corrected. "Swish is a cat. Cats recognize no gods." Bastien set the tray down and whistled, a sharp, commanding sound. Swish immediately spat out the tinsel and trotted over to Bastien, rubbing against his tuxedo trousers and purring like a chainsaw. Piper narrowed her eyes. "Traitor, both of you!" The penthouse looked different than it had a year ago. The wall separating Piper's unit from Bastien's had been knocked down, professionally this time, not by claws, creating one massive, sprawling residence. It was filled with Bastien's sleek, modern furniture and Piper's chaotic jungle of plants. It was perfect. "Are you ready?" Bastien asked, walking over to her and handing her a glass of champagne. "Thomas and Patricia will be here in 10 minutes, and the rest of the pack council." "I'm ready," Piper said, smoothing down her dress. It was gold this year. "I have the appetizers ready, I have the playlist set, and I have a tranquilizer dart gun in case Thomas tries to give a speech." Bastien chuckled, kissing her forehead. "You are ruthless. I love it." He looked at her, his eyes softening. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know we agreed no gifts until midnight," he said, "but I am impatient." "Bastien," Piper warned, though she was smiling, "you already bought me a greenhouse." "Open it." Piper opened the box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. The charm was a tiny, intricate wolf, and riding on the wolf's back was a tiny, diamond-encrusted cat. Piper laughed, tears springing to her eyes. "It's hideous. I love it." "It represents our pack," Bastien said seriously, clasping it around her wrist. "Strange. Chaotic. Perfect." Ding. The elevator chimed. "They're here," Thomas's voice boomed from the foyer. "And I brought fireworks. Don't tell the fire marshal." Piper groaned. "I'm going to kill him." "No," Bastien said, grabbing her hand and pulling her close. "Let him in. It is New Year's Eve, and we have plenty of beware of dog signs if he gets out of line." Piper looked at her husband, the king of the wolves, the love of her life, and the only man brave enough to let her cat slap him. "Ready?" he asked. Piper squeezed his hand. "Ready. Let the wild rumpus start." She turned to face the door, ready to welcome the chaos, knowing that no matter what the new year brought, she wasn't facing it alone. End of story.